Hey everyone, this is episode 2 or part 2, whatever you want to call it, for the Lowrance fish finder tips and tricks that's going to help you catch some more bass in the winter. This part 2 is how to locate how to figure out what's a bass and what's not a bass, and what some of this other stuff on the screen could be if it's not a bass. So this is in simulator mode, so after you get all the settings from part 1, if you haven't seen my part 1 of this video, I'll put a link on the screen there. Just go ahead and click that and it'll take you to part 1. Check out part 1 and that'll directly relate to part 2, which may answer some of your questions of why this is set up. I mean, we did some different adjustments here to help you get some of your optimal performance. Okay, so now what's a fish and what's not a fish? A lot of times when you see these arches on the simulator, they're fish, but when you get out in the water, you're not always seeing these arches because this is basically a fish sitting still and then you're going over it. Fish don't always sit still, and they don't they're not all of them are directly underneath your transducer, and these ones that you're seeing with the arches, they are directly underneath your transducer, because say my hand is one of the arches and what's happening is your transducer is shooting beams down. So if you look, if this is your transducer where my finger is, it has to shoot a beam way down over here, and then get a return back, and then it shoots a beam here, and it goes all the way and it shoots beams, like that. So if this is the shortest distance from your from the transducer to the top of the fish, then it's going to come back faster because it's a shorter distance from your transducer to the middle of the fish. It's a longer distance from your transducer to the front of the fish or to the back of the fish. So that's why it shows up in that arch. There's I can't remember the name of it, but there's a Bass Pro Shops speaker on this, and he talks about it, and he actually shows a graph, and it shows a really good picture of why you actually see arches. But what happens if there's not a bass underneath your transducer? It's not necessarily going to show up as an arch. When you see right here, this right here, you're seeing hard returns and soft returns right there, but this right here could be a little cluster of fish, and just because it's not showing arches, it doesn't mean it's not fish. Some of these other ones here, you don't see any yellow returns in it, so those are going to be smaller fish, but because they do have some orange in it, so those are just going to be some of the smaller fish. But if you do see something that's hanging out right here and you notice there's some cover right here or something, but it's not an exact arch, still fish it, because it could be a fish that's off to the left side of your transducer or off to the right side of your transducer. And this is a good example right here. If you look right here, this is very, very likely fish. And if we zoom in here, I think I can, okay, let's don't do that. Alright, so these right here can definitely possibly be fish, and you always want to relate bass to cover. So if you're seeing something that you're not really sure is a bass, but there's no cover around, I wouldn't even worry about it. But right here, you can see all of this blue right in here, on the ground. That looks like a bunch of bushes, weeds and stuff. And then you see all these are more likely bass, and they're probably active, because inactive bass, there's no need for them to go and hide in an ambush point to ambush a prey, because they're not feeding, so they can just hang out up here. So when you see some bass hanging out up here, if you're drop shotting, you might as well fish for them. You can probably nab a few here and there, but if you're under like time constraints and stuff and you need to hurry up, just look for the active bass, because the active bass is what's going to help you stay consistent and keep catching them. But you can see here's a big cluster of them here, and you can see some of the blue and stuff here. So this is in some of these lines like that means they were on the bottom and they're going up, or other way around, they're coming down. So the drop-offs here, these are more than likely would be bass, because they're relating to a change. Ike and Ellie always talks about, when you're looking for bass, look for change. And if you're seeing nothing on the bottom, nothing, and all of a sudden you see a drop off and you see possibly some arches here, it's pretty good possibility those are bass. So then you know what to fish. These are probably inactive here. I mean, most bass don't, sit in the open water column and attack their prey. They go somewhere, down into some grass or something like that, and then ambush up out of it. So this would be a bass if you want to, you can fish for it if you have the time. But if you're trying to hurry up, may be something that you may want to pass up, because you see a bass here, but it could very well take you 20-30 minutes to catch it. Depends on how much time you spend with it. This bass here, he is on the bottom, and you can see a little bit of blue on the bottom. So it looks like this bass is probably relating to some of this grass, just hanging out in the grass. So he's probably a catchable bass. But then again, it looks like there's just one there, and there possibly could be 2 or 3 there, hugged close together. But the show's pretty good that it's one, and he may be worth fishing for because he's got cover here. But again, there's not very many there. Again, blue is soft return, so when that signal comes down, it's going right through this bush, no problem. So when it can actually penetrate through stuff, it makes it blue. When it can't penetrate through it, it makes it yellow. So that's why, when the beam comes down, it can't penetrate through the ground, sending it back up. And, it's telling you this, hard bottom. You can see the reddish orange there. It's telling you soft right there, so that could be some grassy right there, Actual bushes have, sticks and thicker branches and stuff in it, so they more show up, like an orange type-ish like this, So this orange you're seeing here is probably maybe like a log laying there, or just some thicker type weeds. But this blue is more than likely grass or some type of really soft plant. So that's pretty much how you tell what's bass and what's not. And when you see this area right here, clearly you fish this. But really, you don't always have to see, like I said, arches. A lot of times you're just going to see orange and yellow lines going across the bottom, and that's fish sitting there and you going across them, or while they're feeding, more likely they're moving back and forth on the bottom there. And well, when they're moving, you're more seeing arches, but when you see the lines, it's more just them sitting there. They're right underneath your boat, just sitting there, because that's why you continually see a long, drawn out, solid return, because the bass is just sitting there. So your transducer is consistently reading that thick return, or that solid return of the bass, so it's going to show a long line. When these arches only really show up when you're passing over the bass. So like I said, an arch is when you're passing over the bass. A straight line is when he's just sitting there. He's just sitting there. So, and this simulator doesn't do the best job of showing you that. And in my opinion, it's because when they put these things out on display, they want you seeing all these arches and seeing like everything is just beautiful, and it's the easiest thing in the world to catch. But that's not the reality. During this whole entire video, I haven't seen any lines on the bottom, like if you were just sitting there on top of a bass. So remember that, so that way if you're just sitting there, and a lot of times when you're sitting there and you drop your bait straight down and then you pick it up and you go to change it or whatever, look on your screen and you'll start to see lines all underneath there, just because the bass have come to find out what that smell was, or what you just pulled out of the water. Alright, you guys, so if you guys have any questions or anything, go ahead and leave a comment, and check out part 1 of this video, and part 2 of this video is coming up too. So if you want to see more tips and stuff like that, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and yeah, part 3 will be up shortly. Thanks, guys.